My name is Honorary Colonel William Adcock. Originally, I came from Brampton, I lived in Georgetown, and now I live on the Trent Canal as I am retired. I enlisted on October the 1st, 1964. And the reason I enlisted, because it was a tradition in our family. My father had been in the Lorne Scots, 1935 to 1939, and then he went overseas. My grandfather before that had been in the British Army from 1914 to 1918. So it just was a tradition that I wanted to carry on. Well, our family, at least as far as I'm concerned, for us it's duty. We felt, and I still feel, that we're obligated to give back to this country because we've gotten so much from it. And so for me, the armed forces seemed the perfect way of doing that. So. My grandchildren are small right now, but my children certainly know why I made the choice, because in some cases they had to pay the price for it when I was overseas. A long time away from home. Even when I was in country, I'd disappear for weekends and weeks at a time. And I explained to them that I felt a sense of duty to serve my nation, Well, that's an interesting question. I think over the years, and when I've been 6 decades is a long time to serve. And I think that in the early days it was the frustration of having inadequate resources to do the job, not getting the proper training to do the job that we were supposed to do. And certainly I think that's changed considerably over the last couple of decades, particularly if you go back as far as Yugoslavia and then into Afghanistan and other places in the world. I think those early days of not having the resources, the pay was low, we weren't really respected that much in the reserves. Now, that changed over time, but we certainly in the reserves developed a real camaraderie because of that. We knew that we were value added to Canadian Armed Forces. That really didn't come out till the 90s, and suddenly, hey, we don't have enough soldiers to go overseas. We have to turn to the reserves. And at that time they realized, oh my goodness, maybe we should have trained them better. Maybe we should have paid more attention to them and give them more equipment. And in the end, we did get better training. We did get better equipment. And the soldiers today are far better off for, I think, the sacrifices that we made during those early days. Oh, it has a tremendous impact on me. My father has the longest overseas record in Brampton for service overseas from 1939 to 1946. He came back, and my grandmother used to say to me, he's a changed man. He never was the same. My grandfather the same way. For me, being overseas and seeing some of the things that most of us see when we go overseas to these countries, these failed states, and seeing the sacrifices that our soldiers have made, and knowing the sacrifices that some of my soldiers have made, the ultimate sacrifice in some cases. Remembrance Day it brings it all together for us. And it's a time to remember and a time to be proud of the accomplishments. Certainly in the last 10 to 15 years, the public has embraced Remembrance Day more than it ever has in the past. And I think that's important to the soldiers. And it's important to the veterans, that suddenly they're recognized for what they do, because, there was a period of time, in the 70s and 80s where military wasn't popular. And being at the cenotaph was a lonesome prospect, but not anymore. The thousands that come out to Brampton is just amazing. Well, you have to understand that when you're overseas, of course, you're not with your family. And that's a challenge. Although in this day, modern day of instant communications, it's a lot easier. The first time I went overseas in 1969, we wrote letters. And when I went overseas again, we had a telephone call a month. And the last time I was overseas, we had email and Skype. So it changes quite a bit. But when you come home and you're on high-tempo operations, you know, for 6 or 7 months, when you were basically going 12, 15 hours a day, no downtime, 7 days a week, and you come back and you try to fit in to a civilian occupation, it's very challenging to get back into that routine, away from the adrenaline of being on operations and making sometimes life and death decisions. You know, some of our soldiers certainly have. And so that becomes an issue. The issue of blending in with the family, where suddenly you come home and you try to adopt the same position you had when you left, and your wife taps you on the shoulder and says, you know, we've been doing things this way. You're going to have to just relax a bit and get yourself back into the routine around here, because we've had to survive without you. So there are lots of challenges, and some of the soldiers, you know, they bring back the nightmares and the memories and the loss of comrades and the guilt. So, and that's where PTSD comes in as well, of course. So, and those flashbacks, things like that. You know, even for limited service of 6 or 7 months, I can't imagine what it would have been like after 7 years, you know, in the Second World War. So. Well, I think that, of course, in the Second World War, I didn't understand what it was. And my father, I knew he suffered from it, even though we didn't recognize it at the time. But now, even starting back in the 90s, when we first came home, we were basically taken off the aircraft, sent to camps like Camp Petawawa. Our kit was taken in, we were put in a bus and sent home. And that was it. We had one consultation with maybe a padre, you know, nothing else. And we were asked if we were okay, and most of us lied and said we're okay, and away we went. It wasn't until a few years after, even in Yugoslavia. You have to remember, in Yugoslavia there was a lot of things that people saw, whether it be ethnic cleansing, mass graves, sometimes pitched battles, you know, and then of course into Afghanistan, where we actually really got into combat, and we started to recognize that these folks have issues and they can't cope with them. And the pride of some people is they don't want to talk about it. You know, I remember when I was commanding officer in another regiment, we had some folks come home on leave, and they had just been in a pitched battle in the Panjwai in 2006 with 1RCR. And these two master corporals broke down in tears and said, we want to talk to the regiment. So they did, and they said, we feel terribly guilty because our sergeant was killed in front of us, and we couldn't get him into the body bag properly, and that makes us feel bad. We felt we let him down. So there are thousands of stories like that, and that's what the Invictus Games is about, is, you know, to give them hope and a sense of purpose again. So yeah, it is a serious issue, and it will remain so for probably quite a long time after we have withdrawn from the combat in Afghanistan. And of course, wherever we go again, we have to be aware of it. So yes, yeah, it does cause problems. Obviously, you know, in this generation of iPads and Twitter and all sorts of things like this, you know, they move about and they have that freedom, and there's so much information coming at them every day that you know, sometimes it just bounces off them after a while. They don't understand how lucky they are. Some do. I mean, obviously, our cadet organizations are raising children, and they really understand what's going on. But they really, unless you taste it firsthand and see the suffering in the world, you know, in whatever countries we are, and I've seen it in Africa and Yugoslavia and other places, and realize that we have so much and they have so little, and it doesn't take much to push them over the edges we're seeing in the world today with all sorts of things that are going on. We just have to keep educating them, And of course the argument is, well, you know, you're glorifying war. That's not true. You are honoring those who fight, not necessarily fight, but at least go out to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And I think that's one thing the Canadian soldier has done in peacekeeping operations, because they understand how critical that is. And if we can get the young folks, and I think what we're doing today is a really good thing, because you get some of the younger soldiers, and I'm hoping you're talking to some of the younger soldiers, because I'm an old guy, right? So you talk to some of the younger soldiers, and they'll tell you the same thing, is that they didn't realize what they were getting into, but certainly they recognize the importance of what we attempt to do in the world, because we have a fantastic reputation as an army. Disciplined, well-trained, professional, and that includes our reserves as well, that when we go someplace, we have an impact, a positive impact on the folks that we work with, wherever we work. And so I think the young folks of today have got to realize that it's not about warmongering, it's not about, you know, anything like that. It's the fact that, you know, there are so many people in the world that are helpless, that need protection. And sometimes protection means that you have to defend with armed force, because it's the only way that you can do it, as you've seen in Afghanistan and other places in the world. So that's what I think is important. This regiment has been my life. I've served with this regiment now for over 50 years. And I know what kind of a reputation it's been. This regiment in the Second World War was in every theater of operations that there was in Europe. And this regiment since then has been almost in every peacekeeping operation and in Afghanistan. And we wear the Afghanistan battle honor on our regimental colors. So, and yes, we are respected. Our NCOs are respected. The regiment is respected because we're the first to step up. We never, ever are unable to fulfill what our commanders want us to do. We're always there. In fact, we probably oversupply soldiers when it comes to places like Afghanistan or Yugoslavia, because that's what soldiers want to do. They want to take their training, put it into practice. So yes, we are a regiment with history, and those soldiers on the floor downstairs today are continuing to create history for this proud regiment. And I can't honestly ask for more.